Hey everybody, Ian Smith, your host. Before we get started with this episode, just a really quick announcement. We've reached over 125,000 downloads of the podcast, averaging 540 downloads every single day in the first 8 months. And this is insane. So a huge thank you to everyone who listened in the beginning, anyone who shared the podcast with a friend or a colleague, and especially to those who have donated money out of their own pockets on the podcast Patreon account. I just couldn't have ever thought of a better outcome of opening up a Patreon account than that. So a massive thank you goes to you to help keep this podcast running. So during that first 8 months, we've historically kept to a weekly podcast release schedule. Well, things are going to change a little bit, but it's going to be for the better. So this is episode 37. We've done 36 episodes, weekly release schedule. Starting from here on out, after this episode, we'll move to bi-weekly, guaranteed. So guaranteeing an episode at least every 2 weeks. There is the possibility that I'll release an episode before that. I want to have at least set the standard at least at bi-weekly. And the reason for this really, let's back up a little bit. The reason is actually to give me a little bit more time back into my life, and also to increase, though, the production quality of these episodes. Like, I want to take this to the next level. I want to get more interesting stories, have more interesting people, not just have one-on-one interviews, but maybe have the viewpoints of multiple different people. So the outcome of this will be increased quality. It'll make my life a little bit easier, and it'll give me a little bit more time to, promote the podcast and take care of other important things that are going on. So thank you so much. If this is your first time tuning in, I think you're in for a nice little treat. This is the definitive podcast for the drone industry, and stick around a while. I think you'll like it. Any returning listeners, thanks again so much for your ongoing support. Continue to tune in, and you'll have some really cool episodes upcoming in 2 weeks from now. So thanks so much, and back to the show. Welcome to CommercialDrones.fm, the podcast that explores the commercial drone industry, the people who power it, and the concepts that drive it. I'm your host, Ian Smith. Hey everybody, and welcome to Commercial Drones FM. I'm sitting today in San Francisco with Buddy Michini, who's on the founding team and is currently CTO at Airware, here at Airware's office in San Francisco. So thank you so much for having me here, Buddy, and welcome to the podcast.
Thanks very much, and thanks for the invite. I'm excited.
My pleasure. Thank you very much. So first of all, let's start off with an introduction. So what is your background, and how did you get into drones? And I guess software, but kind of also it's, CTO is Chief Technology Officer. So you kind of deal with all of the technology in the company, yeah. But maybe we'll focus a little bit more on the software for this. So how'd you get here?
Sure. So my background is in aerospace engineering. Spent a really long time at MIT studying aerospace engineering. Did 3 degrees, did bachelor's, master's, and then ended up being convinced to stay for a PhD. Cool part was that I got to work with a lot of the algorithms, controls, adaptive control, autonomy, that sort of work in the background in drones. And when I was there, we had a lab where we would build drones that we would use for sort of proof of concept research projects. And that's how I kind of got into it. And I was really passionate about the technology. Had met Jonathan Downey, who's the CEO and founder of Airware. We're both huge nerds, both love drones, and it's sort of history from there.
Nice, that's cool. And so your job at Airware is CTO, and what does that really entail? Like, what does that mean to be CTO of a modern day drone company?
Well, there's the one thing that I found is that there's actually no one definition for what a CTO should do at a company, and it even changes as the company evolves. But I think the one thing that kind of stays consistent is that it's the CTO's job to look forward, so to consider the problems that you're going to be running into in the 2 to 3 year or more time frame, and begin to guide the sort of product development and some of the efforts towards that future state, as opposed to solving the problems that you're developing a mobile app. You need to solve all the iOS problems or interface to the drone. I spend a lot of my time thinking, what are the big things? Like what kinds of machine learning techniques are we going to have to employ when we start to scale this customer, beyond 10 surveys a day, when they get to 10,000 surveys a day? What are the big problems? So that's a large portion of it. But then I love getting my hands dirty and just really annoying all of our engineers here by being way too curious about what they're doing. Like, I love the technology. So a lot of it is, hands-on, day-to-day. I work with the product and engineering teams pretty closely for a lot of things.
That sounds incredibly interesting. So it sounds a lot like, as well, you're not just solving problems as they come up, but you're really thinking ahead. Okay, what are we going to face if we implement this, that, and for XYZ customer? So really cool. Sounds very cerebral, very hands-on. So that's always awesome. So we'll talk a little bit first also about the history of Airware, and then we'll kind of bring that forward to like the current times that we're in. So we're here in the financial district in San Francisco at your office. Airware was a early commercial drone company. I mean, I remember I was just telling Buddy, for those who are listening, I was in 2013, I was building my own drone for my own drone service provider company that was way too much before its own time. I was Googling on what kind of flight controller, what kind of autopilot that I wanted. And so Airware came up in some of my searches. And so I actually reached out to Airware at the time, 2013, seeing if there was a flight controller and autopilot. And I remember it was still kind of in development. And so I got a PDF and I was like, man, this is cool. This is a real drone company. Like, how awesome is this? And, I was like, okay, I'll keep in touch and then, wait till it's available. But anyways, the company has evolved quite a bit till now, till 2017. That was nearly 4 years ago. So what do you guys do now? I mean, how has the company changed since the time that I contacted you, or since its inception till now?
Yeah, I'll tell you the one thing that's sort of stayed consistent in terms of the company's vision is that we're passionate about bringing drone technology to bear on really interesting real world problems. And we are big believers that the drones are going to transform the way that a lot of things are done. So then it's a question about, the question becomes, how do you do that? And so when we had kind of started the company, and the company officially founded in 2011, and your interactions with us in 2013, where we observed the sort of big gap in the market, was largely related to the inadequacy of the existing sort of autopilot avionics hardware and software, the sort of brains of the drone. And back then, there weren't many options. There were some DIY options. You're probably familiar with lots of them, right? You could kind of piece it together yourself, which was difficult. You needed to know a lot about drones, and a lot of the commodity items just weren't there yet. You needed to pick out the right gyros that had the right tuning fork frequency that wouldn't pick up propeller vibration. Like
I never got that far into it.
There was so much that you'd have to know, or find out by mistake, which is what most people did.
Yeah.
And on the other end of the spectrum, there were some really expensive systems. Drones were not a new technology by any means, even in 2011. But they were really expensive. They were designed for defense agencies. And we saw a gap in that market right in the middle where people had really interesting ideas for drones. And those ideas required the drone itself to be modular, extensible, can put a camera on one and an infrared sensor on another, multi-rotor for some applications, fixed wing for others. And so we saw a big gap in the market in terms of the actual brains, what we called the aerial information platform. And that's what we set about designing. And that turned into the core of our technology as time went on and as the market developed. I think the interesting thing that changed was that companies became more serious about using drones. So it was a fun idea. It was, there was a lot of hype around it in 2013. I think now it's really exciting because companies want drones as soon as possible because the value proposition has been made clear. And as we were listening to customers, as we were working with customers, actually doing deployments with them, what we found was that the actual drone and the data collection, even that whole process, is actually just one part of the process that you would need to incorporate, say a fleet of drones into your everyday business operations. And the cool problem, and it still hasn't been solved, there's no company that operates a fleet of hundreds of drones every single day. That's still not been achieved yet. And as we thought about, well, what would it take for a company to actually do that? We discovered a much broader set of problems than just the drone itself.
Yeah.
And kind of bookends the actual data collection. Before the data collection, there are lots of issues around planning. So, flight planning, what kind of data do I need? What kind of sensor does that mean I need? Compliance, there, obviously you're familiar with Part 107. There's lots of rules to be compliant with as an operator of a drone. And issues of scalability. How do I deploy these jobs to what will become a growing network of operators? That's even before the data collection begins. The actual drone data collection, which involves the drone, lots of companies have stepped into that space. A lot of the systems that back in even in 2013 were not anywhere near ready for prime time commercial applications have become much more robust.
Yeah.
And then after the data collection, there's the data analysis. And this turns out to be the most important part in terms of selling a customer, is you have to provide justification for what value it's bringing. And that almost always comes in the data products or the information products that you deliver to them. So you end up with actually this huge continuum of things that need to happen in order for drones to truly be integrated at scale. And I'd say that's what we've realized over the past few years at Airware, is that set of problems is pretty broad. We realized that in order to go to a large company, and I'll hopefully talk about State Farm a little bit later.
Totally.
Large insurance company, in order to approach them, we needed to bring an end-to-end solution to say that this is everything you're going to need to incorporate drones into your everyday business processes. And so, as a startup still with limited resources, we've spread out significantly in terms of the end-to-end solution that we're providing, and have not been able to focus on one specific area. So that's a really long answer to your question.
That's a great answer, though. It's really comprehensive. So it sounds like the vision of the company hasn't changed as this has gone on. You guys have just kind of been very fluid in how the industry is changing and figuring out problems and how to solve them best for the customers. So solving those problems, I mean, we'll get to the State Farm insurance part in a little bit, but how do you guys do that? Like, what is the Airware product or service, or is it a product and a service, or how does this kind of coalesce for an Airware customer? Yeah,
it starts with a sort of a discovery process that we do with customers. So the industry, I mean, being so nascent, no one has really figured out, for many use cases, some are obviously more mature than others, but for some use cases, and this is what happened in insurance, no one had been using drones yet in insurance. Everyone maybe was trying, we're buying some off-the-shelf drones, they were flying them and crashing them and collecting some fun data, but no one, including us, had really thought comprehensively about what does that product look like. And so at Airware, when we approach customers or they approach us, we go through a discovery process with them. So we'll talk, we'll map out how do you do your existing, for some type of cell tower inspection? How is it done today? In the manual process, we do some thinking here and turn around, a proposal on, hey, this is how drones can probably be used for your use case. That often includes some type of actual data collection. We'll go out, try to fly it, generate some representative data products, and sort of lead that customer through the journey of figuring out if drones are valuable for their business. A lot of times they're maybe not.
That's a good point.
Or not yet. And then two, if they are, then what is a path that we can go on together to implement any of the technology gaps and bring our platform to bear to get the drone data and the information on a regular basis. So it's certainly not an off the shelf product. It's and I think that's a function of how early the industry is and how early some of these applications are, that there is truly some discovery that we need to do and work really closely with our customers.
Do you guys still make hardware?
So as I said earlier, the sort of spectrum of our solution has grown significantly in terms of breadth. We and our what we tell our customers is that we're gonna use the hardware, the drone hardware for your application that suits you, right? That's going to collect the data that you need to collect. It's going to match the types of operations that you're doing. Sometimes that's Airware hardware, and sometimes it's third-party hardware.
Okay.
And it's really whatever is best for the customer. And we've certainly done both.
So what I'm really trying to get at is if I can still buy that autopilot. I mean, I've been waiting for a little while here.
Well, that's the other thing that was really overwhelming back when you were probably inquiring is the sheer volume of interested people. And one of the things that, we had to do was sort of prioritize and decide, do we want to make an off-the-shelf product that anyone's going to be able to pick up? Or do we want to focus our effort on, larger opportunities that, that are maybe more promising for scaled drone operations? And companies do it both ways, and both ways are perfectly acceptable. And the path that we've gone down is, like I said, working really closely with large companies. Typically means sort of a longer cycle. So in response to your question, no.
Okay.
I'm sad to report that today you can't, you won't be able to buy it.
So I remember the product image. Basically, on the way out, if you have an old little prototype of the red autopilot, I would love one of those. If it's just lying around and in there on the way out. Okay, cool. So some of the more longtime listeners of the podcast will remember that I had an episode with Emmanuel de Maistre, who was one of the co-founders of Redbird. And so you guys, the funny story is that during that podcast, during that interview, the acquisition process of Airware acquiring Redbird was probably going on at the time. So now we are in the present day, 2017. It's January, and you guys are, I'm sure there's so much happening that has, getting another company involved, but Airware was very focused and Redbird was very focused on quarries and mining. Mm-hmm. And so how does that play into Airware's strategy? I mean, what was the impetus for the acquisition of Redbird?
Yeah, so, we'd been doing work in a lot of different application areas. And as I said, one of the really key components to the end-to-end product, in addition to the sort of planning and data capture phases, is the data analytics phase. And as we sort of surveyed the market, Redbird had a really, really impressive product. In our opinion, the best product in terms of data analytics for quarries and mines that was out there. And we saw a really sort of complementary fit where a lot of they had been focusing on the data and analytics and it made a really impressive product there. And they also foresaw the fact that in order to scale this globally and to larger organizations, they would also need to develop some of the things that we had been focusing on in terms of the planning and data capture. So there was a really nice fit in terms of product. And we'd made the decision to kind of acquire them. That the company's sizes fit, the culture fit, and so now we've got an office here in San Francisco and an office in Paris, nice. Collaborating on a sort of end-to-end quarry and mine solution.
How many employees are you guys at now with the acquisition?
With the Paris office, we're around 130.
Okay, cool.
Yeah.
That's awesome. And yeah, I noticed the little French touches throughout the office. So in the beginning or in the entryway, instead of a little jar of like candy or chocolate, it was actually chocolat. So I don't know if somebody jokingly erased the E on the end of chocolate, but I thought that was a nice little French touch. Mm-hmm. Awesome. So that's really cool. I think that was a great move by you guys. Obviously, Redbird definitely has a very compelling, and now you guys have a very compelling mining and quarry offering. So moving along to, I guess, other business. So you guys have announced, I think sometime in 2016, maybe mid 2016, a really, really tight, close relationship with State Farm Insurance. So they are a insurance company. Can you tell us a little bit about that, and how does the insurance industry use drones, and what challenges do they face? Sure.
So what we discovered in working with State Farm and some other big players in the insurance company is that the insurance is one industry that is kind of ripe for drone technology, and actually for a few different use cases. One of the very compelling ones, and one we've been working on, a more mature solution for, is rooftop inspection for claims. So as it exists today, if your house or your property is damaged in a hailstorm or a windstorm or a hurricane, as an adjuster will come out, and oftentimes they'll need to actually climb up onto your roof. They'll need to look for damage manually. If you have a two-story or a steep rooftop, that becomes even more difficult. You need ropes and harnesses. Not only is that process sort of by nature a little bit, somewhat slow, it's also dangerous for the actual insurance adjusters. We just, if you check out our website, we basically did a little profile on a guy named Jay. He's a rooftop claims adjuster in New Orleans, and he describes what it's like to be an inspector. And there's we have some GoPro footage of him sort of climbing on the roof, and it's really terrifying, like to be climbing on a roof looking for damage. So great opportunity to inject your own technology and give those adjusters a tool to more quickly and safely do their job, basically, to get drone data instead of using ropes and ladders, and to do it expeditiously. Lots of interesting benefits to sort of injecting drones there. One of the interesting challenges is that by training, claims adjusters are not drone operators. And it's it's an intimidating technology for anyone, myself included. It's when I try out the new software builds here, I'm always, I have to ask 100 questions to, to get comfortable. And so we've really focused on making our operator interface software as easy to use as possible while still retaining safety and still getting all the data that needs to be collected. So that's been one of the fun challenges, and we've worked closely with people who are not expert operators to really tune our software to enable them to do their jobs effectively and safely. In addition to just the sort of rooftop inspection for claims, there's also some interesting application areas for drones and insurance related to underwriting and risk assessment. So. When an insurance company is looking to insure a new property, whether it's residential or commercial, drones can offer a lot of a more comprehensive amount of data more easily than they currently have, so they can determine what is the risk of insuring this property and what are some aspects of this property that that we may not have been able to survey without using the drone, or would have been too expensive, prohibitively expensive to do so. So there's some other areas where in insurance, drones are really a natural sort of augmentation in terms of technology for what they're doing today. It gives them data that enables them to make better decisions.
Quick interruption to remind you that I have a Patreon account for the podcast. Patreon is a great service that allows you to support the podcast if you want to. With Patreon, you can choose to donate as little as $1 a month, which comes out to $12 a year. That goes towards my hosting, website, travel, and promo costs for the show. You can also cancel this at any time without any penalty. It's a small way that you can make a huge difference to ensure the longevity of the show. One more reason to do this, however, is because you also get rewards out of it. The first reward is a private Slack or Facebook group that I'll create, and you'll get an invitation to it, but it's for supporters only. So we'll use this group as a place where we can talk about the drone industry, solve problems, ask questions, and generally level up our commercial drone use and knowledge together. So thanks again for listening, and please go check out patreon.com/dronespodcast to see the rewards you can earn for becoming a Commercial Drones FM supporter. That's patreon.com/dronespodcast. Trust me, those rewards are really cool. So thanks again for listening. Let's get back to it. So I have to ask, it's kind of a off-tangent question, but are you guys, so this is something I'm really interested in, is virtual reality and augmented reality. There's a lot of kind of talk and guessing, I guess, how this technology will be used with drones. And I am a huge proponent of augmented reality because you get so many more, like you can use it on the job site. You can use it while you're operating the drone. You can use it while you're looking at the house for the insurance claim. are you guys investigating that technology at all, or what are your thoughts on augmented and virtual reality? I'm planning on actually just doing an episode on it, and I'm just really trying to gather some information and opinions.
Yeah, I think we haven't looked at it in depth to date. I'd say probably, I think a lot of the really interesting developments have been maybe more recent. But certainly, for a lot of the drone inspection use cases, it's sort of I think a way for the operator to more intuitively inspect either the property or the infrastructure. There's an interesting balance that that we've discovered. You kind of have to walk between having the human interact with the sort of drone operation, but still creating sort of boundaries in order for the human not to make a mistake. They're like bumper bowling, right? You still want some participation from the operator, because typically these are subject matter experts. The claims adjusters that we work with in insurance, they are experts in detecting damage on roofs. That's what they do.
Yeah.
And so we still rely on humans to direct the inspections in a lot of these cases. And I think that's where, something like augmented reality could give the operator a more sort of intuitive way to do that. But it's really important in the background that the autonomous system is limiting what the sort of human input, so that they don't do something that is potentially unsafe. Maybe by accident they go outside of the geofence or a property boundary or an altitude limit, or they fly too close to a structure, dangerously close, so that there might be a risk of collision. So that's the sort of balance, and certainly for the data collection and the sort of intuitive guidance of the drone by the human, I think it's a promising technology. There are some. I suspect there are some regulatory snafus too. One of the primary responsibilities of a drone operator is to deconflict the drone from any other air traffic in the area. In which case, if you had sort of AR goggles on, you may not be able to do that too effectively. So, a little bit of regulatory maturation, I think, that may need to happen, but certainly a promising technology. Not something we've explored in depth, though.
Oh, cool. Yeah. So for me, it's like, you got someone out there, they've got the glasses on, really, not the goggles, with augmented reality, where you can actually still see your environment and just have overlays on top. I think in some cases, it really could increase the situational awareness of the operator, overlaying airspace that you could maybe see and visualize with your own two eyes while you're on the ground, or see your geofence so that how close your drone's getting to it. And then, as far as virtual reality is concerned, while you were talking, I was thinking maybe with photogrammetry, you can, have a really high res photorealistic 3D model that you could do an inspection on after the fact. Because to me, virtual reality, you have no situational awareness. You've lost visual sight of the drone, visual line of sight. So I think that's much better for exploring the data while you're in an office or in some type of environment. So that's really cool. I'm going to do an episode on that at some point later on. I want to get some other experts in that field on the show, but really interesting. So how then, so Airware, what is basically like the Airware product, I guess? Like, if I'm State Farm, am I operating drones myself? Am I hiring Airware to operate the drones, do the data collection, do the analysis? Where do I step in and where does Airware step in? Or does it depend all on the client and the specific job?
Yeah, it actually does depend on the customer. So there are some companies that prefer to do the operations themselves. For companies where the drone may be augmenting their existing workforce, as is largely the case in insurance, in many inspection tasks, there's an inspector, and you're giving them a tool to be more effective. In those cases, we're typically training people to use our drone systems.
Training the client's employees.
That's right.
Okay.
Yeah. In other cases, the customers are really only interested in the sort of data products that come in the end. In which case, we will handle the minutia of scheduling surveys, contracting surveyors, and things like that. So it does depend. It's customer by customer and use case by use case.
Okay, cool. So what other industries then? I mean, we talked about insurance, we talked about mining, but just briefly, what are the other industries that you guys think you can make an impact on with drone technology?
Yeah, there's lots of industries that we have explored to date. We've focused our efforts on the ones you mentioned, so in insurance and quarrying and mining, mostly because we thought that those were, sort of the most ready, so to speak, for the technology for lots of reasons. But there are many other industries that I think have promising applications for drones. Utilities is a really interesting one, so that there is just a ton of utilities infrastructure everywhere. It's funny, once you don't see it, you're sort of trained not to see it, but once you're looking for things like power lines or transmission towers or cell phone towers, it is everywhere.
Cannot unsee.
Yeah, and actually there's lots of stuff behind the scenes. So there are things like electrical substations that handle a ton of the capacity on the power grid. They do a lot of power conversion, a lot of really impressive infrastructure that when inspected more often will likely fail less often. Lots of simple correlations like that, and a lot of it is difficult to inspect. So power transmission lines are a great example. Not only are they difficult to inspect, but they are also dangerous to inspect. So you can do an inspection from the ground, but these towers are 100, 200 feet tall sometimes. So you can't get the kind of detailed inspection that you might want from the ground. You can inspect them by manned helicopter.
They use like a telescope on the ground sometimes.
Yeah, binoculars. Yeah, and it depends. I mean, there's a trade-off. So the more detailed your inspection, the more confidence you have in that infrastructure, or the more sort of insight you'll get into the condition. And so if you can only afford, or maybe a walking inspection is the only thing that really fits into your sort of existing constraints. There are manned helicopter inspections. Those just by nature are dangerous because you're a helicopter pilot. Probably flying around power lines is not the thing that you would choose to do for safety.
Yeah.
And so drones offer a really interesting sort of intermediate point of view there. They can be safely operated around power lines, and at the same time can collect very high resolution data on things like the ceramic insulators that they're really hard to see, or cotter pins that are holding them on. It's difficult to see if they're still secure, or if they're corroding. It's difficult to see that from the ground or from a manned helicopter. A drone we can place right in the exact perspective necessary. So for utilities infrastructure, there's a ton of opportunity for drones, and I'd be willing to bet that that's going to be a huge application. And it's the same thing in telecommunications. Cell phone towers are another great example of where I actually never knew how cell phone towers actually worked until we looked into it. But essentially, there's a tower owner, and then they're like a landlord, and they lease spots on their tower to the different tenants, and the tenants in this case are the Verizons and the AT&Ts who want to hang cellular reception infrastructure on them. And so there's use cases for both the sort of Verizons and AT&Ts of the world who want to know the condition of their equipment, but then also for the landlords of these towers want to make sure that they're capturing revenue and they're getting they're getting paid the right amount for the amount of infrastructure that is currently there, or maybe they want to add another radio. They can either do an engineering survey that's extremely manual, or they can look at drone data and tell and create a model of what's on the tower and if any more can be put on there. So, this is early stuff. I mean, this is one of those industries that hasn't really thought awfully maturely at scale. There's certainly some very smart people working on it, and some of the telecommunication companies have great drone programs that are starting to look into this. But those are a few other interesting applications. There's a ton more that are exciting. Oil and gas is another big one will probably move a little bit slower because of the intense self-regulation in that industry. They just because it has, safety is their number one priority because it has to be. because these are, an oil refinery is a very dangerous place to be.
Yeah.
And so operating a drone there is a lot more difficult than operating a drone over, a cornfield or something like that. So a lot to think about there as well. And I think the sort of maybe the point of the story is that drones are going to transform many, many industries, and it's a matter of timing in terms of, how mature is the drone technology, how mature are the regulations, and how, quote, ready is that industry for the type of cost savings or benefits that drones will bring.
Fascinating. Okay. Wow. So let's shift it over to Buddy Michini himself. So what skills, you've been in this, you were telling me you've been working on the whole Airware project idea since before the official founding date. I think you said like 2008. Mm-hmm. I mean, in your spare time. What skills have you found that have been valuable to have throughout your career in the drone industry from the very beginning till now? I mean, how has that changed? Like, a lot of listeners are probably interested in joining if they're not already in the industry. Yep. So maybe you can shed some light onto that. Yeah,
I think, for me, and I think this is kind of a matter of where you make an entry into the industry. So, kind of being early on in the commercial drone industry. As an aerospace engineer, I think the reason I was attracted to aerospace engineering was that it kind of involves many of the other engineering disciplines and, bringing that all together into an aircraft. And drones are very much the same way. So, you have motors, you have, power electronics, you've got mixed signal electronics, you've got computers, flight controls, navigation, autonomy algorithms. It really is at the intersection of many, many technologies. Obviously, it's difficult to be an expert in all of those things. My sort of field, my background is as an aerospace engineer, kind of having some level of competency in many of them, so that you can sort of understand how all the different components are interacting with each other, which I think is a little bit more valuable early on. As the industry has matured, even over the course of 5 or 6 years. A few interesting areas have started to pop out. So automation is definitely one of them, where right now many of the drone operations are manual. They're still stick and thumb flying, believe it or not.
Yeah.
Still happens. But automating flight plans, doing things like using the data that is collected in real time to then redirect the drone to maybe look at something else or take a closer look at something. And those are... at the core of a lot of that are, solid skills in terms of computer programming, skills in terms of, if you're into more of the autonomy and navigation, there's lots of interesting flight controls, perception, algorithms, things like that. But then I think maybe the biggest thing that's popping out is how to use the data that we're collecting on the drones. And it's, of course, machine learning and deep learning, like these are big buzzwords these days.
Totally. Yeah.
But a lot of the hype, I think, is warranted because, we continue to make these devices that collect data. And if I've learned anything at Airware is that, you can collect way more data than you'll be able to turn into useful information, even this with current drones. So I'd say, data, things related to data are going to be really surefire bets, not only for drones, but for a lot of the other industries where we're collecting more and more. I'll probably sound like your old crotchety, professor in college, but mathematics is at the basis of all of machine learning. It's not something that you can really approach at a sort of superficial level. And, so having a solid math background, if you happen to be lucky enough to still be an undergrad in college, solid math background. And, there's lots of great, not only programs at universities these days, but then also free online tools, places like Udacity or, edX, that have entire courses on these types of things, and they're making it much more accessible. But just make sure you start with the fundamentals. Math, it's great.
Amazing. Cool. That's really, really great advice. Speaking of buzzwords, does Airware have a chat bot?
We do have an internal chat bot.
Oh, you have? Okay. All right.
It's not publicly accessible, but one of our cloud engineers made one, and it's if you ask it, what is your drone company's name, it will generate a drone company name for you. It's pretty funny.
That's awesome.
Yeah.
I wonder if you can do it before the episode's over and tell us one. So I love that. I've had Nick Pilkington, who's a CTO at Drone Deploy and one of the co-founders there, and he really agrees with all of that. I think we came to the same conclusion. I mean, it's such an attractive problem from an engineer's point of view, the drone industry. I mean, you've got mechanical, you've got electrical, you've got aerodynamics, aerospace. Then you have the data, you have machine learning, computer vision, artificial intelligence. You've got logistical problems. It's just an amazing, cool industry that is, I don't know, ripe for the picking for a lot of people. So that was a great answer.
It is. I can't imagine an industry that has more a diverse set of technical challenges than the drone industry. It is a really, really exciting place to be. And if you're a lover of technology, I honestly can't think of many other industries that would be present you with such a rich set of technical problems as the drone industry does.
Nice.
So your drone company's name, by the way, is Flyeron.
Flyeron, like an aileron mixed with fly.
That's right.
Flyeron.
Yeah, that's your drone company's name.
Flyeron. Okay. The Commercial Drones FM podcast is going to rename itself Flyeron, courtesy of the anonymous Airware software engineer who came up with this chat bot. So we definitely appreciate that. Okay. So, wow. So what is next for Airware and Buddy? I mean, what excites you most about the industry right now compared to when you first started in the industry? Like where, are you going to take this? Where's the company going to take this? And yeah, tell us a little bit about that as we close this out.
Sure. Yeah. I mean, by far the thing that I'm most excited about is that we are right on the verge of large companies who have nothing to do with drones 5 years ago are getting ready to deploy drones at scale for everyday things. That is really exciting. I mean, that's been our dream for a long time. We've had to solve many more problems than we thought we would have to solve in order to get to that. But I'm excited for Airware to get there, and lots of other companies. I mean, it's still an early enough industry that it's sort of a friendly group of companies. It's a small industry still, and I'm really excited to see drones being used at scale as part of an everyday thing. I want, when you see a drone being operated across the street, I don't want that to be a weird or thing. That should be an everyday commonplace thing, just like using a laptop or driving a car. And we're getting close. Like we're right on the eve of that. I think the other thing that I'm excited about is as we're using drones, we're collecting a lot of this data, and a lot of the processing we're doing and a lot of the reasoning about the data is very manual right now. And so I'm really excited to see, with all of the data that we're collecting, what types of automated techniques can we use to analyze that data, so that we can sort of scale not only the collection, but also the analysis of the data. And then also, what are interesting things that come out of that automated analysis of the data that we may not have even known before it. That there's lots of interesting things that I think could be relevant for these industries that were dreaming about using drones 2 years ago. I'd never even heard of drones 5 years ago, and would have thought it was crazy to use flying robots 20 years ago. So I'm excited. This is an exciting time for the industry. I think we're starting to turn a collective corner in terms of the adoption of the technology.
Impeccable answer. So if you want to follow Airware, you can check them out on Twitter @Airware, and check out their website at airware.com. Buddy also does some blogging on the side for the Airware blog, so you can check out Buddy's blog posts on the Airware blog at airware.com/blog. And while you're at it, you can subscribe to the podcast on iTunes or Google Play or whatever you use to listen to podcasts. And check out the Patreon page that we launched recently at patreon.com/dronespodcast. And by now, when you're hearing this, maybe a beautiful new website at commercialdrones.fm in your web browser. Hopefully I've launched that by the time this airs. So thanks again so much, Buddy, for having me here at Airware HQ in San Francisco. Do you have any parting thoughts for the thousands of commercial drone listeners out there that are listening to the Flyeron podcast about drones?
I think if you are interested or enamored by the technology and you're not yet in the industry, I think you should you should consider seeing what you can do to get involved, because it's been a ton of fun. It's certainly, changed my life. It's changed the lives of everyone who's worked at Airware over the past few years. So great industry. Hop on board and lobby your congressman for good drone regulations.
You have been summoned. All right, guys, we are cutting off the mics. Fly safe and have a good one. Cheers. All right, so that's a wrap. I really hope you enjoyed this episode. One thing you can do to support the show is to visit our new Patreon page and consider donating some change at patreon.com/dronespodcast. So go ahead and donate $1 if you're feeling it. I will be forever grateful. Again, that's Patreon, patreon.com/dronespodcast. Over and out.